Okay, this is lecture 3 on the politics and public administration. So the last lecture that we did, I told you about the study of public administration. I said it's going to be split up into two parts. We're going to be talking about the politics, and then we're going to be talking about the management and or leadership. So in this particular one, we're going to be talking about the politics or the political environment that I mentioned in the last lecture that people that work in public agencies have to work with. Okay, so the learning objectives for this particular lecture is that we're going to be talking about the role that that politics plays in public administration. And when I say politics, I do not mean that programs should be politicized. You know, in the very recent past, this has been an issue when things that are politicized, and the difference between the politics is how laws are made in order for programs to be implemented. Politicizing something is basically saying you're not going to get this unless you do this for me. So there's kind of a difference, and we'll be talking about it as we go through this lecture. Another part of the another learning objective that we have for this lecture is that we're going to be talking about the role of pluralism, because in this country, in the United States, we have people and we have interest groups, and they don't have like a formal role to play in how laws are made and how programs are implemented, but there is a way that they can get around this and they can have their say, and this is called pluralism. And basically that term pluralism talks specifically about interest groups. And the way that pluralism is defined is saying that interest groups will compete or vie against each other to try to influence the way policy is made. I'll be presenting some self-government models later on in this particular lecture that talks a little bit more about pluralism. But basically, this is what it's saying. That's what our country is based on, a pluralist democracy. We're going to be talking about the politics, public administration dichotomy. And so why there are times when some scholars early in the study of public administration, they thought that politics was too much of an influence in the way that programs were being implemented, and they didn't think it was a good thing. And this was spearheaded by Woodrow Wilson back in the 1700s, so this was a long time ago. So we'll be talking about the public administration dichotomy just a little bit. We're going to be talking about bureaucracies, and bureaucracies as a political institution, and the role that bureaucracies have to play in policy making, in making the laws, and in implementing the programs. So we're going to be talking about their role as it deals with, and there's many different policy making models, but I'm only going to be presenting two. But I'm going to be talking to you about the role that public agencies or bureaucracies can play in helping to get laws made, passed, enacted. Okay, here's that word again, a pluralist democracy. All right, so on administrative efficiency. Okay, so back in, I think it was 1771, if I'm not mistaken, Woodrow Wilson thought that there was just too much corruption and too much cronyism in public administration. And cronyism is basically, you know, if my bud needs a job, if my homie needs a job, doesn't matter if he has the expertise to do it or not, I'm going to go ahead and give him a job. That's cronyism. And Woodrow Wilson said, our government is suffering because a long time ago, public administration, in this field called public administration, that's what government was all about, delivering the programs. And so he said, we need to take the policy, because administration is administration. Now, the next module that we're going to be doing, I'm going to be talking about the different ways that public administration has been viewed throughout time. And so I'll talk to you more about this. But at that time, the theory was administration is administration. And so basically what Woodrow Wilson was trying to advance, the things that he was trying to advance, or the ideas that he was trying to advance, is that saying people that work in public agencies and bureaucracies should have the values of expertise, productivity, and efficiency. So it was kind of more or less of a business model. And what it was a response to this spoil system, this corruption, the cronyism that he felt was going on, that was really way too rampant in government work. Okay, so that went on for a while until the 70s. And so in the 70s, there was a group, and it was called the Blacksburg group. This is Virginia Tech. And so that what they were saying is that, well, no, that's not exactly the way that it works, because there is politics involved in running an organization. You cannot just depend. You cannot say that administration is administration without acknowledging that you have to do it within a political environment. And so what they were seeing is that they were saying, we see that agencies are playing a very crucial role in getting laws made. And not only that, the agency heads are responsible for the regulatory process, the rules and regulations of how governments or how the programs are going to be implemented. And Congress has oversight over these agencies, so that's kind of a check and balance system. So there is definitely politics involved, and the role that Congress plays in their oversight it has like two functions. One is to make sure that the programs are being implemented based on the intent of the legislation, because programs, and this is what I was telling you in the last couple of lectures, is that government agencies cannot do anything if there's not a law that says you can do it. So that's the oversight. That's the, what's the mission of the organization, what's the vision of the organization, what's the strategic plan to be able to carry out or deliver the services that this legislation says that you need to do, you public agency. And so after the law is passed, then it goes to the agency, and the agency is charged with the responsibility of writing the rules and the regulations. And this is called the regulatory process. So that's kind of like the way that it functions. So yes, there are politics involved. So the politics administration dichotomy is not existent. It's dead. They killed it. It no longer exists. You have to get that through your head. It no longer exists because there is politics involved, not politicalization. Politics. Okay, so I was telling you a minute ago that agency heads do have a role to play. And so I'm going to be presenting two sub-government models, and that's a funny word. It's not used in many places. I use it in public policy and public administration, and international relations also uses it. And basically it says, we see that there are people involved in making the laws. So let's see who is making the laws. Well, there's this guy named Friedman, not Milton Friedman, it's another Friedman. And Friedman was writing, and I think it was like 1938. And so he was writing about the way that he saw that laws were being made, and he called it the Iron Triangle. And he said and the Iron Triangle has basically 3 points to that triangle. And he says, I see the congressional subcommittees, because those are the ones that actually pass the laws and have the biggest role to play. But other people also have influence. One of them are the interest groups, and that's part of that pluralism that I was talking to you about. And the interest groups would be like the NRA, or they would be like the Sierra Club, or Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. And so interest groups, the larger they are, and you can also read these interest groups as being those that have like the PACs, or the political action committees. These are the lobbying arms of business groups, trade associations, that type of thing. So these do have a role to play in how laws are made to benefit their membership. Then you have the public agencies, or the bureaucracy heads. So read this: cabinet level, deputy cabinet level. So these are saying, this is our clientele that we are talking, or we're advancing our causes for this. This is how we see that this program needs to be passed, it needs to be changed, or whatever. And so the people that work in these public agencies, not so much the political appointees or the cabinet heads, but the civil servants, those people that are writing and studying all of these problems that are going on with the agencies and what the agencies are doing, and their good points and their bad points and their foibles, and what needs to be changed or whatever. These are the ones that have access or input into, or could have input into the way the laws are made. So basically this is saying this sub-government model called the Iron Triangle is basically 3 points, and they all have a role to play in the way that public policies are passed. Okay, then in 1978, this guy named Hugh Heslow comes and he says, I see that the Iron Triangle is in existence. He says, but I see other things as well. And so he wrote an article, and it was called something like the issue networks in the executive establishment. And he was looking at the executive office, or the office of the president. And he's saying, I see that there are others that also have a say in what's going on in the policy process. It is the Iron Triangle, it is those 3 points. But these other people are are non-institutional actors, or they do not have a constitutional role to play, but they also have something that they might want to say that they can't or are saying. So let's study this sub-government model and see how it works. And so he's looking at it and he says, well, what I see is that it's very fluid and dynamic. There's really no leader in these iron triangles, and the iron triangles are usually based on a substantive policy area. It might be something like water quality, or it might be something about homeland security. It's going to be something that's where people have shared goals and shared values and shared missions, and they're just trying to make to fix whatever the problem is. And so they come in as fluid and dynamic because they come in and they will contribute their part, what they can contribute to the discussion or to the research or to the proposal of the solution, and then they'll leave. And then others will come in and pick it up from there, things that they can do. So that's why it's fluid and dynamic, or they're saying, no, we need your expertise in this other area over here. You can do this? Okay, fine, but I cannot do that. So it's very fluid and dynamic. Again, there's no leadership, and that's one of the characteristics of these issue networks, is that people want to help. People want to help, and they're saying, I can do this, but I'm not going to be a leader. There's no leadership in this one, but it seems to work. All right, so who does this include? Okay, it can include the media, because the media is very good at pointing out problems, and in public policy we call it the focusing event. That they bring attention to something that's important, saying, okay, this is important, and we need to do something about this. So it's the media that can have a say. I'm not saying that it's going to be biased, and media is biased. You have to realize that. You have the think tanks, and again, the think tanks, even the think tanks are also biased. Like, for example, if you talk about liberal types of think tanks, it could be the Brookings Institution tends to be more liberal, the Pew Foundation tends to be more liberal. The more conservative ones would be like the Cato Institute or the Heritage Institute. They tend to be more conservative. So, you know, what they're saying and what they're proposing tends to reflect that ideology. It can also be other bureaucracies that deal with the similar clientele or the same clientele, but in different ways. That they might say, well, you know, we see this as a problem too, and you know, we're going to be supportive of you. If you need our help in any way, we can go ahead and give you some information or whatever. Okay, academics, because academics do studies, and the types of studies that need to be done for a lot of these laws require a PhD to do it. But then you have to put it into language where the politicians can understand it, because a lot of politicians are like not that educated. I mean, they're educated, yes, but they don't understand, you know, like a lot of the studies and the way that the studies come out, what the numbers mean, what the statistics mean. So they have that role to play, and the staffers are the ones that play that role. You know, they come and they say, okay, this is the study, this is what it means in plain language. So they will take information from the academics, they'll take information from these think tanks, because the think tanks are also writing these papers. The media is doing this investigative reporting. Bureaucracy is sending over their 2 cents as well. So the staffers are kind of the ones that are putting these together. And these staffers are usually people that have degrees in political science or public administration or sometimes business administrations. Okay, then there's this one guy, Kingdon, John Kingdon. And John Kingdon was writing in the 80s, in the early 80s. And so he wrote a book, and it was called The Multiple Streams Model. And that's his sub-government model, but I'm not going to be presenting that one too much, other than to say is that Kingdon's contribution is saying, yes, I agree with what Heckler was saying, and what I see is that when we have all of these people working on different problems and solutions, like the media, the think tanks, the academics, or whatever, they're called policy entrepreneurs. And academics will not actively do something, but they will work with nonprofits to get something done, such as the think tanks. So when they see that the conditions are right, the political conditions are right, they will push. That window of opportunity will open up, and they will push to get their solution through. And that's actually called the garbage can model. And we'll be talking about the garbage can model when we talk about organizational theory. But that's Kingdon. Okay, so the advantage of this issues network is that it does open up the system a little bit more to the policy process, to decision making, and so it does exclude regular citizens. You didn't see regular citizens anywhere. You didn't see the president anywhere. You didn't see the courts anywhere. This is the true policy making. This is what policy making has traditionally been in the past. Okay, so the issue is okay. So these are This is one part of the policy process, and I understand this is not a policy course, but you kind of have to understand, the trajectory that it goes through. So the laws, the solutions are presented, the laws are passed, and the laws are passed that go to the bureaucracy, to these public agencies, and they become programs. And that's where this course picks up, is introduction to public administration, where it picks up from there. Okay, so programs are they come to the public agency, and so the public agency will then implement them. And so it can be either the public agency, the public sector agencies themselves, or sometimes these programs are privatized. They go to private companies, private organizations, and the public agency's role in that is that they will monitor the contracts. A lot of them will be going to the nonprofits. There's more and more that are going to the nonprofits. And again, it's the public agency's role to monitor that. This happens not only at the federal level, it happens a lot at the state level as well. So let me give you an example of the state level ones. We have this thing called the welfare state, or the welfare system, and there's many, many different social programs that were being delivered by the public sector, the state agencies. And as we have become more Republican, and this has been going on for a while, Texas became a very Republican state in 2002, and the state agencies started to decrease. They started to shrink up, a reduction in forces. And a lot of the services were either going to private companies, or they were going to the nonprofits. Now, the nonprofits, an example of something that went to a nonprofit would be something like the Adult Protective Services, where it went to a nonprofit, and this one's called the Council of Governments. So instead of the state providing it, what they do is they contract out with, the Council of Governments is a conglomeration of many counties. Like here, the Coastal Bend Council of Governments is the 13 counties that constitute the Coastal Bend. And so they took over the services. So anytime that there's like elderly abuse, or an elderly person needs help in some way, that they're the ones that provide the services. If they need to go into a nursing home, they will do the assessment, do what level of care they need. So they took over that function for the state. And so it's not the Council of Governments themselves, but they are contracting out to different nonprofits to do that. An example of a private organization, a private company that took out some of the state's role would be, for example, Medicaid. And this is not everywhere, but in the larger urban areas, Medicaid, for example, Medicaid has been privatized. So that is more an income eligible type of program, where they're saying, well, either you qualify for it or you don't qualify for it. And that one's been pretty successful. So I'm not saying that everything needs to be developed, delivered by the state, and nothing by private companies or only nonprofits. It's a combination. And so the reason that they do this is that there needs to be cost effectiveness. I mean, they're looking at the budget. Who's going to be able to deliver these services at the lowest price? Now, the public sector's role has somewhat morphed, saying that people that work public sector do have to know how to monitor contracts, because if you are hiring or awarding a contract to a nonprofit or to a private company, because it's state money, because it's federal money, we need that accountability thing again. We need to keep track about what's going on and who's using what money, and that they're using it in the correct ways, and that they're not misusing the funds. Okay, so I keep using that word implementation. What is it? Well, what that is saying is that it's the way that the programs are going to be delivered. And so the laws are passed, and they're going to go to a public agency, and there is some office there that's going to craft the policy. They're going to write the policies, and they're going to write the rules. They're going to write the procedures. They're going to write the standard. They're going to write the regulations, and that's called the regulatory process. And now this regulatory process, that one too is kind of political, because it has to be registered. There's you have to publish the rules. and it has to be published in the Federal Register or the Texas Register. It has to be available for a certain amount of time. You have to have public input at the federal level. You have to have 3 public meetings. For the state level, you need 2 public meetings. You have to have a comment period. It's subject to judicial review. In other words, the courts have to look at it if it's being challenged. Okay, so that part, so when it goes to a public agency to write these rules and regulations, going through the regulatory process, then that's where the management function comes in. And that's the part of governance. That's known as governance. And so the values are going to be a little bit different, because when it comes to implementation of government programs, the values that become more important are equity, efficacy, effectiveness, cost benefit or cost effectiveness. So these are not, they're not profit based. There's no bottom line, there's no profit margin. They're based on accountability, on equity, things that are important to the public sector. Okay, we're going to be talking a lot about bureaucracy, and the bureaucracy is just basically there's public bureaucracies and there's private bureaucracies, but we're going to be talking about it in terms of public bureaucracies. And when it comes to the public bureaucracy, there's really no constitutional basis that says there shall be a bureaucracy. What it does say is that the President of the United States, or POTUS, is charged with the responsibility to execute the legislation that was passed, or you need to administer it in some way. And so the bureaucracy has come to become known as the 4th branch of government. And so the function of it is to implement the laws that are enacted. And whether you know this or not, but you will be hearing this throughout this course, is that when laws are passed, they are passed in order to affect social change, in order to change people's behaviors. And bureaucracies are that institution that are supposed to change the behaviors. They're supposed to set up the rules and the regulations so that people's behavior will change. Okay, so there, I said it. Okay, let's talk about organizational structure. And so organizational structure is the way an organization is set up. And so there's this one sociologist, his name is Max Weber, not Weber, it's Weber. And Weber was writing, I think, in the early 20s. And he was studying organizations. He's a sociologist, and he said, this is what I see of how I see these public agencies are being set up. And it was kind of a satire. It wasn't like he was saying this is a good thing. He was just saying this is the way that I see it set up. But all of a sudden it became known as the ideal type of bureaucracy. And he says, I see in these bureaucratic organizational structures that efficiency is highly regarded because of the way that they're set up, because there's a hierarchy. And that's a funny word, hierarchy. But all that means is like kind of like a pyramid, and it's kind of like the chain of command. If you think about the military, that chain of command, that's what he's talking about. He says, I see that it's efficient because people's feelings don't get in the way. I mean, it's objectified to a great extent. And there's impersonal rules, there's specialization, and so productivity really becomes the value that's the most important, because what we need to do is what he saw that they were doing is that they were trying to increase the workflow and to maximize efficiency. As I said, people said, or the people that work in public sector anyway, at that time, they said, oh, this is wonderful. This is the way that it needs to be. This goes right in there with the administration that Woodrow Wilson was trying to pass. Okay, so some of the characteristics of bureaucracy then are that they're huge. All of these organizations, I'm not just talking the public sector, even the private sector, these organizations are huge, and it's called economies of scale. And so there's a reason that these bureaucracies are as big as they are, because what happens is that people will be hired based on their expertise and their experience, their skills, knowledge, and abilities. That's what it's called. And so they're going to specialize, and there's going to be a division of labor, and that's what leads to the efficiency. Bureaucracies have legal, rational authority or hierarchical authority. And so what this is saying is that because there is this hierarchy, this chain of command, when you get an order from your higher up, from your boss or the boss's boss, they're doing it because they're saying this is the law, this is how we're interpreting the law, and that you need to do it. So it gives you the authority, the legal authority to be able to do it. Now, that's based on that set of rules, that regulatory process that I was talking about just a little bit ago, that says, okay, if this is the law, this is what the boss says of how we're going to be doing it, and it's based on the rules and regulations. The regulatory process that it's been through, it's gone through the federal register, the state register, and so we know that we have the legal authority to be able to deliver it in this way. Okay, it's based on the specialization and division of labor. The more specialized you are, the better you get at your job. And so they divide it up so that you're doing your job and no one else's job. You know, there's good parts to that and there's bad parts to that. When I talk about the management, we'll be talking more about how labor should be split up and the good ways that you can do this, and problems that you may have. Okay, I use that word expertise. So when you work at a public agency, especially the public agency, you're hired because you can do the job. That's the merit hiring. And so people that have a certain level of expertise become, well, experts in their area, right? Experts in their area. And so they should be regarded as experts. So when they're giving their advice, their opinion, it's because it's based on the knowledge base that they have. So let me give you an an example of this one. We going through a period now with the pandemic. That's when I'm recording this, during this pandemic period, where all of a sudden there is a certain agency that is being, many of the agencies have been under attack for a long time, but I'm talking about the CDC. And the CDC has tremendous levels of expertise, and we should value their opinion. But because their opinion and their opinion is based on scientific evidence, but because that has become so politicized, it has become problematic. I just want you to know that there are problems with the institutions that we have right now. They will survive, but the problems of this of the reputation of the agencies are kind of under scrutiny right now. But I mean, the agencies are that institution, the bureaucracy, will survive. All right. Agencies have this thing called institutional memory, and so what that means is that there has to be records of what's being done. There has been documentation of what you do. There's always going to be record keeping and documentation at every single public agency because you have no choice. That is part of the transparency. That is part of the accountability, those values that I keep talking about. And so what it does, it leads to more permanence and stability of the agency, so that these agencies will exist regardless of who's going to be there, regardless who's going to be the political appointees, regardless of what other merit-based people are going to come in, regardless of anyone. There's going to be stability in that agency because of the record keeping, because of the documentation, because of the expertise, because of the merit-based hiring. Okay, some of the implications then for the working in a bureaucracy or being a civil servant, if you want to call it that, is that there are certain rewards which may or may not be true at this particular point in time. But usually people that work in bureaucracies are considered to be public officials, and traditionally or historically, maybe I should say, there has been a high level of social esteem, that you know what you're doing, that you work for the government, that you work for a good agency. You're considered an expert. You have tenure, which means that it's difficult to get fired. You have a good salary. You have good benefits. And then you have a career ladder, which basically says I might start at kind of at the bottom rung, but I can work my way up. And that's very true, especially when it comes to the federal employment. You can always work your way up based on education and based on your experience. So these are some of the rewards that public officials have for working in this bureaucracies, for working in this type of political environment, because it's not always the easiest thing to do. You get paid a lot more when you work in the private sector, but people that tend to work in the public sector, tend to do it because I think that people that work public sector or public service career type jobs tend to be more altruistic, or they want to do good for the country, more altruistic in the way that they view life. Okay, some of the technical advantages then of working for a bureaucracy is that uh, this is not so true anymore, but it was true for a very long time that it was the public agencies that had the most technological advances immediately, and then they went out to the public sector, to the private sector, and that was called the military industrial complex. I would say because of budget cuts, especially to research and development, that's probably not so much true anymore. But what happened is that uh, all of a sudden, this technological advantage that we had kind of transferred down to humans. And so it was looked at as machine-like precision in order to yield efficiency for large-scale tasks. Another way of saying that, it became very dehumanizing. We became perceived as machines. You know, I don't know if you've ever been told this in your job. If you worked a public sector job, you're not paid to think, you're paid to work. So just do your job. That's not a good way to manage, I can assure you. People that work in public agencies tend to have a lot of permanence, meaning that they're going to be there. They're going to be there for a while. And so people that work in public agencies tend to be the permanent players in the political system and the policy process. These are the merit-based employees, the civil servants. They're going to be there all the time. And so people that are there all the time tend to provide more reliability and more stability to the agency, that the agency will survive regardless of who comes in as a political appointment, that they will provide the institutional memory that I was talking about just a little bit ago. Of course, the downside to that is that they kind of perceive themselves to be just another cog in the wheel. So there's like a good side to that, and there's a bad side to that, as to most things in life. Okay, guess what? People that work in the public sector do have a lot of power, and they have a lot of power because of that legal authority, legal rational authority that I was talking about under Weber, that laws are passed and they go to the agencies to deliver these programs, to implement these programs. So it gives you a basis of power. And there's been a tremendous growth in bureaucracies, and bureaucracies have become so powerful that in many Republican administrations that have gone on, especially starting with Reagan, and I'll be doing a part on how presidents have used this thing called federalism, which is another part of this political system that we have to deal with. There has been an increase in the way that these administrations have tried to bring to make government smaller. I guess another way to say that is that they come in with the express purpose of making government smaller, because they're saying government is getting too big, it's getting too powerful. We don't want government, especially the public agencies, to be so powerful anymore. And so they are often known as a fourth branch of government then. Okay, there are some strengths though, and some of these are more internal, and basically you have the knowledge and expertise in your particular area. And having knowledge and expertise, and you know what they say, knowledge is power, right? And so if you have the knowledge and expertise in a particular area, that's a good thing. It gives you leverage. People that work in bureaucracies may coalesce in their groups or in their units, and this may be a good thing or maybe a bad thing. And now that one is called organizational culture. We're going to be doing a whole section about organizational culture, but this is basically what it's saying. Being a cohesive unit is a good thing. And so it's kind of like, think about the military, where you're serving, no doubt about it, but you're also serving your fellow troops, where you're saying no man left behind. Well, it's kind of the same attitude when it comes to working in bureaucracies, because you're saying we as a unit will succeed, or we will all fail. So there's cohesion of groups in the units. Now, the downside to organizational culture is that it may also develop into this thing called group think, where you don't see any other viewpoints other than the ones of that group or that unit because it's become too cohesive. But again, we'll be talking about that later. Okay, then finally, the political appointees are the ones that should provide the leadership for that organization. And the political appointees, and think of these as like the cabinet level members, secretary of this, secretary of that, their deputy secretaries, that they should provide the link with the external environment, with people out there. They're the ones that should deal with the politicians, not you as a civil servant, as a career civil servant, but they deal with the politics that are going to be involved. Okay, I want you to look at this particular website. This is a university website. And the reason I want you to look at this one is because you're going to be doing a paper, your research paper. It's an organizational analysis paper. And these are some of the things that you're going to have to start looking at. You're going to have to conduct like a website survey, not a web-based survey, a website survey. Like you get into this agency and really, really look at the agency and see what it has to offer, where it's been, where it appears to be going, strengths, weaknesses, that type of thing. So where do you get that information? Okay, so we're going to start out a little bit by looking at this, and this is not homework. It's not an exercise. You don't have to do it. It would benefit you to do it because I'm talking about different elements of it. If I say, well, the mission of the organization or according to strategic plan, you'll know what I'm talking about. Okay, so when you get into this website, see if you can find out what the mission of the university is, because every public organization has to have a mission. And that mission is somehow tied into what the legislation is saying it's supposed to be doing. Okay, all public agencies and private companies as well have strategic plans. This is where we are now. This is where we want to be in 5 years from now. These are goals, these are objectives, this is how we're going to get there. Who are the stakeholders? The stakeholders are that pluralism that we were talking about. Who are we going to be, or who's our clientele? For this university, it's the students for sure, but it's not just the university, it's also the community. So kind of look at that and see, who's included in that. How is it governed? That's this part, this blue part over here. How does it appear to be governed? Is it only very hierarchical and you don't see that there's what we call shared governance, that it's only the top level leaders that are making all the decisions for everybody else? And how would you possibly know that? It's very difficult to try to figure this out unless you're working in the agency themselves. But see if you can find out anything. It should be in the for the university in the momentum. It should be in the momentum. Okay, and this last one, how does the organizational structure fit into these areas? Okay, I want you to look at the organizational chart, and it's kind of hard to teach this course because it's gonna be hard for me to talk you through an organizational chart. Hey, but I'll do my best. Okay, I'll do my best. Okay, so I want you to look at the organizational structure of it and see if you can learn to read an organizational chart, because you're going to be doing a whole section and an assignment on organizational redesign. That's why these things are kind of important. I'm setting the course up. I'm setting you up to finish the rest of the course to be able to do well in the rest of this course. Okay, so what you should be getting from this particular lecture then, or for the little exercise that we're doing, is that you should be able to read organizational charts, try to figure out how to read organizational charts and organizational structures. If it's a hierarchy, a team model, and we'll talk more about that. If you can figure out what the governance is for this particular agency, which is this university, those are the stakeholders, and who has a say in what's going on, the mission statement, strategic plan, and the stakeholders. So, excuse me, so see if you can find that out. Pause.